Great to see you all. Hope the conference is going well. And thanks for joining this session because there are several other sessions going on at the same time, but this is going to be the best one. This is going to be the most stimulating conversation about the future of cities and our urban landscape and the built environment. So thank you for coming. I'm David Kim with WSP. We'll get into introductions later, and we're really thrilled to have some outstanding guests with us from BrightDrop and DoorDash. And that's exciting because, as you all know, DoorDash is the food delivery company, app-based, and probably most of you have used DoorDash. I've used them. And BrightDrop is the manufacturer of many of these delivery vehicles, electric vehicles, connected. So that's exciting. So we've got the whole delivery platform with us, and they are obviously making a huge impact in how our cities are operating these days. But let me start with, just to set the table a little bit, there is an incredible opportunity in front of all of us to completely remake the landscape, the physical landscape, the built environment, because of the bipartisan infrastructure law, IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, however you wish to call it. And yes, you've heard all of the superlatives before, unprecedented, once in a generation, blah, blah, blah. It's all true, and because the funding is massive. But it's not just funding, and what people gloss over is that from a policy perspective, this infrastructure law gets the policy right in terms of priorities. Everything from climate, sustainability, equity, electric vehicles, EV charging, more transit, more rail, walking, biking, micro-mobility options. All of those things are covered in the bipartisan infrastructure law in a way that has never happened before. And I think it's upon all of us, especially those in the public sector, but the private sector as well, to make sure we don't squander this opportunity and that we use these funds and these newly created programs in a way that completely transforms and remakes our landscape, our physical landscape, the built environment. We cannot do the same old, same old. This is not status quo. This is not business as usual. We have to do something special and meaningful with these funds, and we're all going to be held accountable, whether you're in the public sector or private sector, to do something really game-changing. I hate that word, but I use it. Truly transformational, because if we blow it, then we'll never see a bill like this ever again. So that's what's in front of us. And I just wanted to say that at the start, just to set the stage. And so with that, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce yourselves, 1 minute, and we'll start with Tanya.
Thank you, David. So I'm Tanya Skilton. I lead procurement and supply for BrightDrop, which is a General Motors startup. We are focused on decarbonizing the last mile and containerizing the last mile as well. So lots of exciting things going on. Been with General Motors just over 5 years, really involved on that game-changing transformational side of the business where we're creating autonomy, electrification, and all kinds of new business opportunities, including one I hope to get to talk about a little bit later as we get into the questions, where we're leveraging some of the vehicle data to create insights for DOTs, and very excited about the infrastructure bill and the opportunities that that creates. Prior to General Motors, I worked for a company called Rio Tinto, which is a global mining company. I was in mostly Australia and Singapore. Had a very global sort of career, but very grateful to be here as part of GM's efforts into the future. And thank you for having me.
Thanks, Tanya. Mariah.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Mariah Ray. I work on the public policy team at DoorDash. I'm the head of strategic partnerships and innovation policy. I've worked at DoorDash for about 3 years leading these efforts that include programming and partnerships in transportation and safety, workforce, and merchant. And prior to that, I worked in government and government consulting. I was actually a fellow myself out of my grad school at the office of Mayor Kevin Johnson in Sacramento. So I can relate to the experience of entering into the public sector through fellowship. And then I worked in a government consulting nonprofit working with local governments around the country. So while Tanya's had a very global career, I've worked in the local side for a good long while. So looking forward to speaking about DoorDash and our commitments to the communities in a little bit.
Thanks, Maria. And I forgot to mention that food deserts and food insecurity also a big part of this conversation here. And obviously DoorDash has much to contribute to that, as well as BrightDrop. I didn't introduce myself. David Kim, I am with a company called WSP, which is an engineering firm, and I'm not an engineer, but I work on policy development, project delivery, funding and finance, and those kinds of areas, especially in the areas of transit and rail. And so that's my background. I most recently was Secretary of Transportation in California, moved back to DC from Sacramento just a few months ago. I lived in DC for a really long time before going to Sacramento, and so it's great to be back. All right, so we've got our panelists here, and we're ready to dive right into it. And let me start with a really high-level global question for both of you. Since both of you are in the private sector, what can governments and corporations do to work together to solve some of these really difficult challenges facing cities today? And I should mention, at this conference, there are several newly elected mayors who are here, the mayors of Boston, Seattle, and Cincinnati, and I'm probably missing a few, but they're all here at this conference and probably will be at the gala dinner tonight. So they've got some really tough challenges facing them, all of the issues we've talked about and then some. So what can the private sector and government do to form better partnerships and cooperation? Let's start with you, Tanya.
So I'm a big believer in partnerships, and that applies to every single one of us as humans, right? Where no man is an island, and no corporation, no government, no city is an island. We're so interconnected and dependent on each other. I love that this type of occasion brings the private and public sector together to have meaningful conversations. From a General Motors and BrightDrop perspective, the way that we're approaching it is obviously engaging, but particularly driving the agenda in a way that we contribute the best that we know how from our 100+ years as an automotive company to bring to the table options that create choices for people in terms of transportation, making transportation accessible, making it affordable, and making it such that people have choices from amongst the ecosystem. Now, that ecosystem needs the public sector to help sketch out what that total ecosystem is going to look like and what roles companies like GM and BrightDrop can play within that space. So, for example, from a General Motors perspective with electrification, we've got a very ambitious agenda to make EVs available to everybody. I hope that some folks have seen the ads, everybody in, and we're absolutely invested in this. So by 2025, we're going to be putting in $35 billion in investments in electrification, in automation. We expect to be producing over 1 million EVs each year by 2025. Now, how do you go from 0 to 1 million EVs per year in the next 3 years? And when you think about it, supply chain professionals, supply chains have all of a sudden become a topic everyone's talking about. It's not just a turn the switch. That's where we need the public sector to step up. We need encouragement, incentives that enable the supply chain that enables that EV to happen, to become localized in this country, on these shores, so that we can ensure that it's economic, that it is sustainable and responsible and ethical, and that it delivers what the people of this country and of this region need in terms of transportation from an electrification point of view. And that's just for passenger retail. If I think about BrightDrop and what we're up to in terms of enabling the delivery infrastructure, we're focused on decarbonizing and decongesting inner city areas. The other thing that we're doing is reducing the total cost of ownership for fleets and containers and tools and software for the big delivery companies to keep up with this huge growth in e-commerce. What that does is it makes delivery of goods, the things that you and I are so used to and kind of me personally hooked on, accessible to parts of the population that may not have been economic to serve from an e-commerce perspective previously. That to us is tremendous, but again, we need the public sector to work with us in terms of enabling access to electrified delivery pods on sidewalks in cities, and very detailed sort of things like that. But we're trying to make sure that we go as far as possible with the strengths and capabilities we have and meet the public sector where it's at in order to serve the community.
Yeah, that's great. And if there's time and interest, we can dive into really wonky topics like curb management. Some of you may be familiar with that. Mariah.
Sure. Oh, I was going to go there. I would say, to echo some of the things that Tanya said, I think that the best of private and the best of public can meet and really move things forward in a way that's very meaningful. And some of the ways that the pandemic afforded DoorDash the opportunity to do that is through some of our signature impact initiatives. One in particular, where DoorDash for years had been partnering with the social sector, partnering with food banks and food pantries to bring excess food to those places that were collecting food to really reduce food waste. And that was really a sustainability drive for us. And then the pandemic hit, and we were being inundated by calls from school districts, from local government agencies, from folks trying to reach people who didn't have access to transportation and weren't able to access their daily school meals as school children would need to do, or get their supplies, their medical supplies, get their Meals on Wheels, which was largely volunteer driven. And so DoorDash really answered that call and stood up an entire new sector within our business to serve the government and nonprofit space. It's delivered at cost, and so DoorDash is not making profit off of this venture, but it's been an incredibly successful enterprise in our business to really partner with the government sector and create access to food and local goods. So we're really proud of that effort. And then just to switch gears a little bit, I think having access to data, as you were alluding to, Tanya, in your remarks, in your introductory remarks, is something that the tech sector in particular can really partner with government on if it's done in the right way. And what I mean by that is DoorDash has access to tremendous amounts of data, as you can imagine. We're connecting 25 million people, customers, average customers per month, to a network of 500,000 merchants in your communities through a network of millions of Dashers who are doing those deliveries. And so you can imagine the data that comes from that, from traffic data, heat maps, the busyness of certain corridors, the existence of food deserts, right, in certain places. And so working with the government in meaningful ways to advance the government's priorities, whether it's DOT's priorities to reduce bike incidents and traffic fatalities, or to work with DOTs and transit agencies around reducing traffic at the curb to make it a more seamless curb flow rather than one that is, marked with unsafe driving behaviors, double parking, idling, and things like that. Those are ways that we can really work together. And we've done some great pilots. There's some third parties out there that are kind of aggregating that information, which anonymizes it and makes it a little bit more comfortable for tech companies like DoorDash to share. But we really look forward to continuing to partner with DOTs like the DC DOT and others that we've already been able to partner with.
That reminds me, there is a fascinating book that came out written by a friend of mine, Gabe Klein, and it's called Startup City, Inspiring Private and Public Entrepreneurship, Getting Projects Done, and Having Fun. So Gabe used to be the head of DC DOT and also Chicago DOT, and this is next on my reading list. It's supposed to be a fascinating read on the role of the public-private sector and how private and public sector can come together and how change can take place in a public setting, and given the slow pace of bureaucracy in most governments, how to get things done quickly and meaningfully. So I think you sort of touched upon probably what he has written in his book. Okay, so let's go back to Tanya. You touched on it, electric vehicles, and the acceleration towards, I think you said 1 million, and making them affordable and accessible to those who are not affluent. Because I think we all know electric vehicles are oftentimes seen as the playthings of the affluent, Tesla and that sort of thing. And I think everyone recognizes that the price points are coming down, but until the price gets really affordable, truly affordable, how do you make electric vehicles affordable and accessible to lower income individuals, as well as making EV charging infrastructure more available and meet them where they are, since they're not always located in lower income neighborhoods? It's
a challenge that we're tackling head on right now, given our commitment to 1 million per year. 1 million per year. I don't know that we have enough affluent people in the world to take that up, and that's not our objective at all. So GM is very much a company that has been focused on our communities here in the States and around the world for its history. So specifically with the electrification efforts, charging, obviously, is a big thing that's on everyone's mind. And how do you tackle the challenge of making sure that you don't have range anxiety? You know, you can charge up when you need to charge up, and that you can do it economically. So one of the things that we're doing is working with our dealer network. This is a fascinating partnership because dealers are... Hopefully everyone's okay. Didn't hear any screams or shouts. So dealers are not owned by General Motors. They're all community businesses, really usually community family-owned businesses around the country. In the US, there are about 4,000 General Motors dealerships. And 90+% of the US population lives within 10 miles of a dealership. So we're working with that network to put in destination level 2 chargers that will potentially expand the charging network by at least 40,000 charging units so that everyone really within 10 miles has access to charging. And level 2 destination chargers take about 4.5 hours to fill up completely. Now, if you're using it as a backup, maybe it's not your primary charging, you're able to charge at night. So charging and working with the infrastructure providers, our dealer networks, the public sector, highway charging, all of that is a critical kind of foundational effort that we are involved with enabling. The other thing that we are also doing is investing about $750 million, I believe it is, to enable chargers to be installed in your homes. So we're participating in the economics of enabling EV ownership directly with people who purchase or lease GM electric vehicles to put in the chargers and the infrastructure you need in your homes. We're also working with workplaces and general public charging to make this available. The other thing that we are, of course, doing is working with the public sector to see how do we continue to have accessible the incentives that have made new EV ownership so affordable for people that have invested in Bolts, for example, the GM Bolt vehicle that's been out there for a few years, and looking to see how that can be extended into used EVs as well, because it really is a whole marketplace, a circular economy. And EVs, you know, there are things that can happen that can be done with the battery once it is no longer able to be used for driving. So battery life actually is significant, even post, you know, being able to be used as an automobile. You can do other things with that battery. And so we're investing in some of these exciting startup ideas inside of GM to see how we might extend, reuse, recycle batteries themselves in their current state in terms of being a storage device and powering other parts of the economy beyond mobility and transportation. So the possibilities are really opening up in front of us, and we're leaning into them.
Thanks, Tanya. Why don't we stick with the theme of affordability and go to Mariah? You know, if you think about it, there are lots of parallels between DoorDash and ride-hailing companies like Uber and Lyft, but also big differences. Obviously, Uber and Lyft are in business to transport people. DoorDash exists to transport food, a product. And this is not to throw Uber and Lyft under the bus, because I use them, and they're probably a sponsor of this conference. But I use them, and probably many of you use them as well. But their pricing has gone up. They are facing a workforce challenge. They've lost a lot of drivers, and prices have gone up. Demand goes up, and you can pay exorbitant amounts to take an Uber or Lyft even across town. I'm not familiar with DoorDash's pricing structure, but what has been done or what can be done to make sure that DoorDash services are relatively affordable, especially to lower income individuals who rely on DoorDash for delivery of food?
Sure. So I'm happy to take a little bit of an umbrella view of DoorDash. We are a three-sided marketplace. So we connect consumers to the best of their communities, merchants, and that could be a restaurant, which is really how we were founded. But it's increasingly, grocery stores, pet stores, pharmacies, other retailers. I mentioned 500,000 merchants on our platform. About 50,000 of those are non-restaurants. And so we have a growing presence in the non-restaurant space. And we connect them through a network of dashers. That's our term for the delivery workers who are independent contractors who do work on our platform by logging in every every day. And so long as there exists this equilibrium of consumers who are willing to, pay for this convenience and merchants who are willing to list their goods to reach a new kind of class of customers, and then delivery workers, Dashers, who are willing to log onto these platforms and access this income, there's going to be a business model. There's going to be an economy that we're serving. And I think some of the things that DoorDash has done, to really maintain our service and really grow our service has been to provide a really great experience for merchants so that they stay on our platform, provide a really seamless and delightful customer experience, but also really engage Dashers and meet them where they are and ensure that we're doing right by them all the time. And so most recently, what that looked like with rising gas prices, we issued a gas rewards program. So based on a certain number of deliveries you do, you could get a percentage back. We have a Dasher debit card for folks who are unbanked to be able to access their earnings with no fees, so that Dashers who, may need their income sooner in order to pay for their bills, they're able to get that with no fees. We also have policies and programs that we put into place to meet our merchant community and engage them. And we're constantly rolling out product features and things that will improve the merchant experience with no additional costs. And so we really pride ourselves in being able to partner with those stakeholders that we serve, the merchants and the Dashers, to meet what their needs are so that they can serve customers better. At the end of the day, these merchants are small business owners. They just want to make great food. They want to have a seamless experience, and they want it to, get out the door fast so that customers can enjoy it and build their brand. And that's really what DoorDash exists to do. It's to help merchants really build their brands and reach a class of new customers. I think I wanted to touch on a point that Tanya was making about the really great partnerships to bring EV charging and bring that infrastructure, and then moreover to find reuse for batteries. I think that's just such a great example of like these win-win solutions. So it's clearly a win for GM to be able to expand access to EVs and to be able to manufacture and sell, but then being able to close that loop and create novel uses for the batteries. It really reminds me of the work that I was sharing earlier for DoorDash to, get food out to the masses and yet really close that loop by working with food recovery organizations to ensure that that food is not going to waste and that food pantries and food banks that are happy to receive it are able to do so. And I think when businesses can think very innovatively in that way to say, there's this problem of waste or a problem of, overproduction or whatever the case is, but we're going to help address that problem as well as the, increasing the consumption on the supply side. I think it's just a really great novel way to look at things. And I love when hearing about other companies that are doing that. So learning a lot from you, Tanya.
Thanks, Mariah. You brought up something earlier that piqued my interest, and you talked about road safety and using data to track hot spots, congestion, but also dangerous spots. And I think, as most people know, there is a troubling rise in pedestrian and bicycle fatalities and serious injuries in not just big cities, but everywhere. And the trends are going in the wrong direction. The US is an outlier because those trends are going down around the world, but they are going up in the United States, and it's troubling. And I'm wondering what companies like yours, BrightDrop and DoorDash, can do to contribute to this, I guess, whole of government or all hands on deck effort to reduce fatalities and serious injuries among pedestrians and bicyclists, but also drivers of vehicles and passengers as well, because they're all going in the wrong direction. It's a combination of, it can be everything from infrastructure to equipment, vehicles, driver behavior, lack of proper infrastructure. But what are your thoughts on road safety and what companies like yours can do to contribute to a better outcome?
So I think for DoorDash, it takes a number of ways. And in fact, our team works on it. We work with partners as well, because at the end of the day, DoorDash exists to grow and empower local economies. We want merchants to have access to customers. We want Dashers to feel safe. And an increasing number of Dashers are on bikes, and they're, traversing New York City streets just like any other bike courier would. And they're facing the same safety incidents that other bikers are facing. And so what we do is a few things. We partner with bike advocacy organizations. We partner with Bike New York, for example, in the city of New York, as well as other safety advocates like the League of American Bicyclists, and we promote their agenda. And so we actually partner with them. We, are hand in hand lobbying with them, issuing calls to Mayor Eric Adams, like we did last week, to really increase bike safety infrastructure, increase access to protected bike lanes, which I hear that the mayor is a prolific biker. And so it's actually something that, he's happy to hear the message, but you really have to band together. Public interests and the social sector and the private sector need to really come together to make these solutions real. And so we've been meeting the moment by joining our advocacy organizations and really partnering with them, because it's for the Dasher community that we care so much about. On the data side, it's actually really interesting. We've been approached a few times by city governments in Seattle, in DDOT and DC, and New York as well, about sharing some of our data about traffic hotspots, sharing some of our heat map data about where the commercial activity is busiest, so that they can be better predictors of where there might be busyness on the roads with a lot of car dashers or bike dashers attempting to park or pull over. And so we've been really successful in partnering to provide that with government officials when requested, so that they can revise some of their policies and perhaps repaint their curbs or look at other uses for those streets. And it's actually led to, in the pandemic era, some of the street closures and some of the, safe street initiatives have come out as a result of these types of public-private partnerships. So I think there's a really long road ahead. There's a lot more that the private sector can do in partnership with the public sector. As you mentioned, David, just the reports out just in the last couple of weeks of traffic incidents and road safety incidents and deaths going up in 2021, whereas, in the rest of the world, they went down, right? Think about how many fewer car miles were traveled in 2021 and 2020. Like, the trends should not be going the way they're going. And so we feel at DoorDash that, while we have so many drivers on the road, so many bikers on the road, and so many communities that we're serving, we really have a part to play in this.
I didn't realize until just now that many of your dashers deliver on bike. That's great. They're probably using e-cargo bikes in places like New York City and
Absolutely. Yeah. And we have great partnerships with e-bike providers to promote e-bike charging as well, and e-bike parking, because e-bike safety is also a concern, right? The safe charging of batteries and safe storage. And so there's just a whole other ecosystem you enter into once you realize that this is taking hold, and you really want to promote it for so many reasons.
Tanya, do you see BrightDrop or GM going into the e-bike space someday in the future? I know you're focused on vehicles, but what are your thoughts on that? Or any synergy between batteries for EVs and batteries for e-bikes?
It's funny that you ask. So part of the work that BrightDrop is doing with containerization of the last mile, we're working on these delivery pods, you might call them. We call them trace units. And that's, if you think about it, the word e-cart flipped. It is trace for track and trace, blah, blah, blah. And we're actually tapping into the bike supply chain for how do we kind of outfit and equip these units so that the containerization is effective, and you can enable large payloads to be operated by one individual pushing a cart maybe on a sidewalk, et cetera, with some level of propulsion, some level of connectivity, and that sort of thing. So we certainly are thinking laterally about just simply movement of goods towards people, because that is a trend with e-commerce. People are moving less towards their goods are moving towards them. And how do we get into all of the different kind of nodes where movement can happen in cities? We've been working with quite a few bike providers and courier companies. In fact, we just completed a pilot in Washington State where we trialed the deliveries with bikes with our trace units, connected up with them to see how that might enable certain types of deliveries. And these can be then decoupled from the bike, recoupled, and so enabling both walking and ridden deliveries. So there's a lot that we're exploring in that space. But I just wanted to touch back on the use of data for the greater good as well. I'm very proud personally of a venture that GM only announced in the last 2 weeks called Future Road. Future Road is a business that I personally was responsible for incubating inside our technology startup and tech startup world inside GM for about 18 months. And what it does is it uses proprietary anonymized data that our vehicles collect as they're traversing around the world to create a live virtual picture of the infrastructure. And so there are things like, we've started out with crash hotspots. We're partnering with INRIX, who is also a data provider and aggregator, to provide a picture of crash hotspots and provide information about what's going on around crashes, where there are hotspots, so that DOTs can really hone in on what are some of the causal factors. There are changes that are simply administrative changes that they can make in the way a certain intersection works, or maybe there's a geometric change that needs to happen. They can get these insights now in real time because of the vehicle data, where it used to take them 3 to 6 years of longitudinal data analysis to be able to even get close. That's just the first step. Then think about, vehicles gather weather data, micro weather data. So there's weather stations around places, but vehicles are in every space when you're on the infrastructure in the road. We can now help DOTs start to get a picture of, okay, snowstorm has started. Which particular intersections are becoming slippery first? Where do we send our limited resources and people to tackle the space before things get really bad and it becomes a much bigger problem because now there's backups in parts of the city and the snowstorm's getting worse elsewhere? There's all kinds of opportunities with this data, and just thinking differently about it, anonymizing it, of course, aggregating it, and looking for insights to the extent where we can tell a DOT where Latin long exact locations of potholes are and how severe are they. So is it too soon to go tackle them, or is it just hitting that sweet spot where it's getting bad enough that it's worth going out and spending the money to fix it? So really lots of possibilities that open up.
Yeah, that's fascinating and really exciting. I'm glad to hear about your initiatives as well as Mariah as well. Okay, question for the audience. How many of you have ever been on an e-scooter or e-bike? Some of you have not raised your hands. I guess you have to try it. You got to try it one of these days. They're fun. They're a lot of fun. Take one after the conference. They're a bunch outside. Okay, so you talked about potholes, so that's a great segue. As I mentioned earlier, there are a handful of mayors at this conference, the newly elected mayors of Boston, Seattle, and Cincinnati, and I'm probably missing a few others. But if they were sitting right here, what advice would you give them as they begin their tenures and start to tackle these incredibly difficult challenges, whether it's curb management, housing, lack of affordable housing, lack of accessible transportation, congestion, road safety, pedestrian fatalities, bicycle fatalities, all of that? What's your advice to them as they tackle a very daunting list of challenges?
I'll start because I spent some years advising a mayor. So I feel like I can maybe hearken back to those days. I think, first 100 days in office, you have to come up with your strategy and you have to take your campaign priorities and figure out how you're going to translate them into action. And I think one of the things I would implore all these mayors, and of course these are mayors in very, progressive cities, but cities that have a really strong business presence, is to come up with how you're going to thoughtfully engage the business community to achieve your solutions. Because at the end of the day, the public sector doesn't have the resources and the manpower to do it alone. I don't think any of us have the resources and manpower to do many things alone. And so you really have to work together in partnership, in particular with the business community. So I think coming up with your approach and strategy for thoughtfully engaging the business community, whether it's through advisory boards that you create where you bring together the business community, whether it's through meeting with your local chambers or other business advocacy organizations, but really coming up with your message and how you're going to work with the business community together to solve the problems. And I think establishing deep enough relationships where you can come up with these novel solutions like we're describing with curbs, sharing data, aggregating data. I think that there are really wonderful solutions that we would, work through together. There's also really wonderful resources that mayors have, that, mayor staffs have, that bring business leaders together, like these types of conferences. And so I think really having a presence at these sorts of forums for that networking would be a really great step too.
Well, I'm sure Mayor Johnson took your advice to heart and engaged heavily with the private sector in Sacramento.
Yeah, he sure did. Yeah.
Very good. All right.
Honestly, I couldn't agree with you more. Businesses are part of the stakeholders for mayors, elected officials, and we have our needs as much as what we can bring to the table and offer in terms of resources, just innovation, all of that. The one other thing that I might add is just an empathy approach, and it seems like it should be obvious. Elected officials should be starting with their constituents and working backwards. This is something that at General Motors we're really focusing on. We have a heritage of being an engineering company, right? And so engineered products, and we've created this awesome product, now we go and sell it. We're flipping the script completely on that and really kind of paying more attention to what are the problems out in the world that we have a unique equipment or talent or asset with which to address. Start with the problem and work backwards. And to me, this is a really powerful way of operating in life generally. And I think for mayors starting out, obviously with the laundry list of issues that are all legitimate, that are all high priority, how do you pick the few things to make a big difference on? Start with your constituents, really listen hard for what will make a big difference, and then down select so that they can actually get something done and move forward, use that momentum to then move to the next thing on the list.
Well, if you see those mayors at the gala dinner tonight, maybe you can bring that message to them or someone here. Okay, so now we're going to spend some time taking your questions. And so I'd like to open up the floor to any and all with questions. I'm sure you've got some. So who wants to go first? Or comments, editorial comments, opinions. Yes. Can I please ask you to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, hi. My name is Violet Saina, and I'm from California. I'm in the environmental justice space. And I've done a lot of work around electric vehicles, supporting projects to help low-income families from underserved communities to access EVs. I'm very honored and very happy to hear a lot of the work that both your companies are doing. And I keep thinking, when you guys are talking about EV and also the challenges, I keep thinking about all the many other challenges that communities of color and low-income people out there were trying to provide that service and even have them access this technology, we say, but there's still a lot of barriers. I hear you talking about accessing to charging stations. Most of these underserved communities, majorities of families are renters. And so if you're trying to install a charger in a rental home, you have to get permission from the homeowner to have that done. And many of the renters are afraid to do that because the rent might go up if you make changes to improve the home. So there's a long range of problems. And even in California, with our Clean for Cars program, sorry, you can actually get up to $9,000 to purchase an EV. And even if you bundle up with all the other benefits, you can actually, a brand new EV for a Kia Soul, you can actually get that for like $2,000. So all those benefits and all those programs still doesn't move the needle for low-income families to access. And a lot of the reasons to do with their social status. If even with those programs, for example, those families, yeah, it's there, but our FICO score is so low that we don't qualify for it. Or even families are afraid to apply because there are members in their home, they're in their households that, they're not, they're illegal immigrants, and if they take on that opportunity, there might be questions asked. So going back to, I guess my question is, are your companies, you talk about empathy, And in these communities of color who will be left behind, no matter what other, other possibilities that GM or DoorDash can offer to fill in that gap or to bring those people along the journey that you are on?
I can speak to some of the financial empowerment programming that our company puts forth. And what I'll say is that a lot of it was designed with the Dasher in mind. I mentioned the Dasher community, those that are doing deliveries on our platform. And the reality is Dashers are everyone. They're majority women, in fact, but there are 6 million people that did a delivery on DoorDash last year. And so we make a great deal of programming available for all Dashers and their communities, including some in partnership with the National Urban League and with Unidos US, two of the largest immigrant advocacy organizations and African-American advocacy organizations, respectively. And so we've been partnering with them for the better part of a year to bring forward online course curriculum on budgeting, access to mortgage financing, improving your FICO scores, student loan financing, and really trying to level up Dashers who are going to DoorDash as a means of supplemental income to really improve their financial position meaningfully. And so I think that those types of programs, when companies like DoorDash who recognize that we have a population we can reach and they're looking to our platform for a certain thing, they're looking for supplemental income, but we have what we consider a responsibility to really meet their needs and ensure their success on and off our platform. It's, the ability to provide educational resources like that I think really will help people. One of the things we're also exploring is how to make EVs more affordable for Dashers, those who want to have access to EVs in addition to e-bikes. And so we're exploring partnerships to subsidize that access, because at the end of the day, when you're using it to, make these deliveries and earn income, you're able to pay it back. You just kind of need the leg up to access it in the first place. And so we're working through ways to do that, because we realize that, folks are coming to our platform for a reason, and we want to ensure that they're successful off the platform as well.
That's really, I'm learning cool things as well from you, Mariah. That's cool. So some of the things that we've been doing is again, like flipping the script kind of concept. Instead of thinking about it ourselves as selling vehicles, thinking about ourselves as providers of means by which miles can be traveled or miles can be traversed by your goods in the case of BrightDrop. And so when you do that, then you can start thinking about ride sharing, car sharing, those sorts of opportunities which solve the immediate need of I need to get from A to B, or my stuff needs to get from A to B, versus making it a big, ownership, and you're getting into some of the challenges that come with that if you are in a community or an individual that is, trying to work towards those objectives. So we've had things in the past where, for example, we've worked with Lyft drivers to enable them to, invest in a vehicle and work through the ability to do the work and pay it off during the course of their work cycle. And there's a number of initiatives of that nature. In fact, we're changing how we think about EV miles traveled and accessibility of that for any and all income levels, really, because the ownership of an EV or the whole driving experience, the riding experience is changing enough, even generationally, that car ownership is not necessarily something that people aspire to quite so much as they did traditionally. So my kids, for example, the minute they learn to ride their bikes, they're like, do we have to learn to drive a car? I hope we don't have to learn to, like, Mom, are you working on those AVs? And I'm like, yes, not fast enough, obviously, for you guys, but autonomy is another frontier, which really, in many ways, brings mobility within reach to people who may not have even had that option previously. So think about people with all kinds of disabilities that, need somebody to drive them. And there are community organizations that provide it, but autonomy takes that a step further still. And, we haven't solved all of these problems, but we're very aware of them, and we talk about them in a way that is unusual inside a large corporation like GM. We're very aware of it. And I'll touch a little bit on some of the work we do from a social perspective. So we recognize that climate change impacts different communities differently, and particularly if communities are already in a space where they're left behind, they're likely to be worse impacted. So we are stepping forward with resources, with volunteering and opportunities for our own employees to get involved, but also with some financial backing so that we can help kind of enable organizations that are more in touch with the realities on the ground to extend their programs to the community, as well as our own employee resource groups inside General Motors. So I'm on the board, as my colleague Ram here in the front row is, on the board of our Asian group, which is very engaged with our Asian population to enable, advocacy, their own professional development, and just bringing their whole best self to work. There are organizations like that across the landscape of GM. There's veterans, there's ABLE, which are looking at, accessibility, people with all kinds of different levels of ability, and how do they engage meaningfully in the workplace, but even in their communities. And there really is something for everyone to some manner to get involved and live their community life whilst inside the company, creating the economic value that we do. And it is a very rich landscape and a wonderful place to be able to operate in that way. Obviously, not necessarily solving all of the different complexities you talked about, but there's a lot to do.
Tanya, you touched on something that really warrants its own separate conversation, and that is vehicle ownership and the fact that those numbers are declining, and your kids are proof of that. And there's an acronym called CASE, C-A-S-E, Connected, Automated, Shared Electric. That's the wave of the future. And again, that's a separate conversation, but I think that's where we're going as a society, as a world. Okay, other questions in our remaining time? Someone's got a question, comment, right? We're a small group. Yes.
Hi, I'm Kenzie. I work in immigration. So while y'all were sharing some of the issues that y'all are working on with government, what came to mind for me and some of the issues that I've seen, I used to work closely with the Chinese immigrant community in SF. And I think two of the big issues for them was language accessibility and finding jobs as the immigrant. So I wonder, I guess my large question is, what are some of the issues that you're addressing for the immigrant community, and how are you informing yourselves of what those issues are with the partnerships that you have with other organizations and government?
I'm happy to speak to that on behalf of DoorDash. I mentioned earlier our suite of financial empowerment programming, and that really was born out of establishing meaningful relationships and partnerships with the National Urban League and Unidos US, and really understanding, knowing through our own survey data that a lot of our Dasher community are immigrants. And so how can we reach them? A lot of them are English language learners. How can we reach them better? So working with those organizations to say, here's what we know about our Dasher community. How can we work together to reach them? And so with Unidos, we actually just launched this past spring a financial empowerment program that includes one-on-one financial coaching that's language accessible, which is so meaningful to be able to provide for folks who are dashing on our platform and they're using it as a means of income, but they really want to improve, their credit score. They really want to improve their financial position. They want to have a better budget or save for retirement. And so being able to provide that service in a language accessible format. And by the way, these services are all free of charge. There's nothing, that we charge for it. This is entirely coming as a service, as a resource from DoorDash through these partners. So I think leveraging our data and being able to inform our partnerships through that and inform our programming by using that data is really meaningful. And then I think looking at who really accesses our service and how we can continue to meet them through new partners. And so I'm very excited to say that we're looking at ways to address the population of Dashers who traditionally face barriers to employment, and really looking at ways to partner with organizations to create a pathway for them to dash while also improving either their work skills or improving their financial position to be able to go to college or other things to be able to really improve their lives. So we're looking at partnerships with things like with organizations like community colleges, with large government entities to say, how can we meet the populations that you are serving by giving them an opportunity to earn income on our platform to help pay for school or to help pay for their job skills training or other things. And so I think those are other ways that we're doing that at DoorDash.
So not dissimilar level of engagement that GM has. Programmatically, it's different. So we do engage with a number of organizations like APAICS. For example, we made a grant that enabled 9 out of the fellows this year with the Racial Equity and Justice Fellowship. We also have invested with the Organization for Chinese Americans to kind of support their programs in the K through 12 and the education space. And we're actually spending some time with them this afternoon to learn more about what they're up to and how we can support even further. We also invested with and I'm going to butcher the name of the organization, so it's a Legal and Education Defense Fund. Also for Asian Americans particularly. And some of this is fresher and in the wake of some of the issues and incidents we've talked about these last 2 days, but really our engagement with the community and with the different facets of the U.S. North American community is ongoing and standing. Personal story was when, I think it's called the Muslim ban, generally, we came out. Mary Barra, our CEO, wrote a letter to the whole company committing that General Motors would stand behind all of its immigrant employees, of whom I am one, and that they would continue the sponsorship that they had already provided for us to be able to come work, and that whatever was ongoing in terms of immigration support would not stop, that they would stand behind us. Some people I know personally had to stop working because their status kind of was suspended for a couple of years, but we didn't lose sight of them or touch with them, and they're back at work now. And that's a very personal, direct impact that the company has had on people's lives. I remember when that whole thing happened, kind of my husband and I going, okay, we took our kids from very far away and moved here. Now what? But just that one letter, and it wasn't just words, it was carried out in terms of the actions, makes people recognize that this is a company that is committed to its communities and isn't just committed to the bottom line and the shareholder. There is a much larger level of commitment and engagement.
In the 5 minutes we have left, because we're getting the high sign, one of the funniest job interview questions I ever got was, is there anything I should have asked but didn't, but you would like me to ask? So I'm going to turn it around to Tanya and Mariah. Is there anything I didn't ask but should have asked and you wish I had asked?
I'd love to, I think, expand a little bit on the question that was just asked about immigrant relations, just how we're serving immigrant communities, because I feel like a community that is very extremely overrepresented among the immigrant population are restaurant employees and restaurant workers, and of whom there are many, many on the DoorDash platform. So I mentioned, 500,000 merchants listed on the platform. The majority of them, I would venture a guess, have an immigrant background or are women owned. And so it's just a very overrepresented group among, one of our most important constituents, right? Our customers are our restaurants, really, who are buying our service. And so one of the things we were able to stand up several years ago was Kitchens Without Borders. It's a program where we designate immigrant and refugee-owned restaurants on our platform very prominently. And so for folks who want to specifically support local immigrant and refugee-owned restaurants, you can just navigate the DoorDash platform, the carousel, and find a Kitchens Without Borders kind of self-identified immigrant or refugee-owned business. And then there are, of course, promotions and other things that we do to support them in addition to that, including running a number of them through an accelerator program to really help them improve their business, to really leverage data and insights from their DoorDash business to really grow, manage their supply chain better, manage their operations better, and grow their business. And so I think that that is a population that, that's often a first step when you're an immigrant. You work in a restaurant, you're a bus person, you're a server, and then you work your way up the food chain either at that restaurant or you work your way out. And so DoorDash really recognized that that's a community we want to reach, we want to support with extra services. And so maybe not a question, but just a follow-up to that point. And if I may flip the script a little, David, in reading about you and learning about you, and of course, seeing the amazing work as a resident of California that you were able to do in California, I would love to hear from you about, you mentioned CASE, and I think that was like a little teaser for me. I would love to understand, what's your vision for the future of transportation, given that you've worked at the highest levels of federal, state, and now in the private sector. I think it'd be really interesting to see just kind of how you see the transportation landscape evolving and, how the private sector is meeting the moment, perhaps. So I just kind of love to hear like your future vision for transportation.
Well, I'll be very brief since, that's also a separate conversation, but really it's all about giving people choices and access to as many modes of transportation as possible, whether it's a vehicle, whether it's walking, biking, transit, rail, high-speed rail, scooter, e-bike. All of those things need to be available and accessible to everybody because we don't spend time on any one particular mode all the time, or we ought not to. We should have as many choices as possible, and clearly companies like yours are helping to meet that. So that's the 30-second answer since we're out of time. Okay, so to wrap up, I will simply say that I am feeling optimistic about the future of our urban landscape and cities despite the many daunting challenges, and that is because of BrightDrop, DoorDash, and other companies that are making a meaningful contribution to the greater good. Clearly, you are doing that through your services, your products, your technology, your know-how. And I think our mayors who are here this week, they would be wise to, as you said, Mariah, engage with the private sector and enter into partnerships with you to solve some of these very intractable and very difficult problems. The private sector has an important role to play. And so I feel optimistic about the future for a lot of reasons, because we're all in this together. It's all about partnerships and collaboration and engaging in dialogue and working with one another. So Mariah, Tanya, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Thank you everyone for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference. And if you're going to the gala dinner tonight, enjoy. And I think that's a wrap. Thanks.